Hi, friends. Okay, so today we are going to continue with this same family. A lot has happened between where we left Jacob at the end of our last reading to where he is now. So I'm going to try to catch you up real fast. I'm really trying to keep these videos shorter than they turn out to be, but I can't make any promises because I just haven't been able to. I really wanted to keep them under 10 minutes, but anyway, enough about that. So far, you can tell that I've failed miserably. We'll see how we go. So Jacob flees for one of two reasons, depending on which source you're reading from. In the one story, it's because he has swindled his brother and now his brother wants to kill him. And in the other one, it is because Rebecca just can't bear the thought of him following in Esau's footsteps and marrying foreign wives. So he flees to Padan Aram, and there he marries two women. Actually, he marries four women, but sort of. Okay, so he marries Leah and Rachel. Except Rachel was the one that he really loved. And you may remember this story from Sunday school, that he loved Rachel, and so he agreed to work 7 years to marry her. But then at the end of the 7 years, they had a wedding, and the next morning he realized that he had actually married Leah instead of Rachel, because it was the custom that the oldest daughter would be married first. And so then he works 7 more years and also marries Rachel. And then along the way, there's some infertility issues, and there are some a couple of servants involved, kind of like if you remember that Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, and they had Ishmael together. Same kind of deal. There's Bilhah and Zilpah, who are like servants, or probably more likely slave women, to Leah and Rachel. And so anyway, those 4 women, he has 11 sons. Okay, he's not yet had the 12th one, which is Benjamin. He'll have him later on. So Jacob has made this huge family, 11 sons, and of course they have taken wives and had children as well, and all of this has happened, and finally he is ready to take his family and move on. Okay, so he's leaving, and he gets word that his brother Esau is coming to meet him, and he's coming to meet him with 400 men. And Jacob does not think this is a good sign. In fact, he's kind of panicking. And so he starts by kind of dividing up his family into 2 camps. And then he starts sending these gifts ahead of him to Esau in the hopes that maybe he can, assuage him a little bit. Because he fears that Esau is coming to harm him. If he's coming with 400 men, and the last time you guys were together, you were, swindling him out of his blessing. I guess I can understand how Jacob got there. So we're going to pick up the story at Genesis 32, beginning with verse 22. This may be a familiar story to you. This is the story where Jacob wrestles with God. The same night, he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, that's Zilpah and Bilhah, the servant girls, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. So those are the mothers of the children, and he's got them across the river. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Right, so we see Jacob again. It's all about the blessing, right? He's already gotten Esau's blessing. Now he's asking for another one from this man. We'll see whether we continue to think he's a man or whether it's God himself. He's asking for another blessing. "I will not let you go until you bless me." Verse 27. So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Okay, so there, this man that Jacob's been wrestling with kind of reveals his true identity. Somehow, this is God in the form of a man. And we know that Jacob has been striving with and against humans since he was born, right? He came out of the womb holding on to his brother's heel. He swindled him out of his birthright and his blessing, and he actually swindles Laban, when he's there, that's a whole different conversation that we didn't get to. So Jacob he's a pretty crafty guy, okay? So we know that that's true. And now he's even taken on God in this wrestling match. And God says, you have prevailed. There's a lot of things to think about there. Okay, verse 29. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob gets his blessing, but Jacob is not going to get his name. Do you remember who that privilege is reserved for? Who gets God's name? If I were like Miss Margaret, I would offer you candy if you get that right. You go ahead. You let me know who gets God's name, and I will see if I can borrow some candy from Margaret to give you. Okay, let's see. Verse 30. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. And there was a common belief that to see God would mean instant death, okay? And so here Jacob is saying, I survived. That's amazing, right? So he names the place Peniel, which if you see your little textual note there, it means the face of God. Okay, verse 31. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Okay, so even though he saw God face to face, you notice that God had said, let go, it's almost daybreak, right? And then here we see the sun is rising. So did he get a full view of God? Was it still obscured by the rising sun? I don't know. Verse 32. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. Okay, I think we've talked another time, I can't remember when, about etiology, kind of the idea of like why is something the way it is, and a story that explains it. This is an example of that, right? When this was written, probably they knew, well, we don't ever eat that part of the meat. I wonder why that is. Well, here's the explanation, okay? Something important that's happening in this story is Jacob has this important name change, okay? And name is changed to Israel, which is what we then refer to all of his descendants as, right? The people of Israel, the Israelites, right? Those 11 sons, and eventually they'll add Benjamin, they make up the tribes. They'll be the 12 tribes of Israel. You may have heard that too. Okay, so this is kind of that point where they go kind of from being a family to being a people, and they're given this name, Israel. Okay, so Jacob is alone on one side of the river, and he is attacked in the middle of the night. Okay, there's so many things to talk about here because we could spend a lot of time talking about how he wrestled with God and somehow won or prevailed, and that's a whole other conversation. But if we're just thinking about this relationship between Jacob and Esau, you think in that moment when he's being attacked, who does he think is probably attacking him, right? He's probably anticipating that this is my brother. He's finally here to get me, right? But it's not. In fact, it's God. And Jacob may not be defeated, but he leaves with this permanent limp, right? This reminder that of this encounter that he had with God. Okay, so that means we still have this reunion between Jacob and Esau to get to. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to pick up at the beginning of chapter 33. Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on ahead of them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. Okay, so we still see this theme of favoritism playing out. You put the servant girls and their children first, and then Leah, and then Rachel and Joseph in the safest spot at the back of the group. And really, you hate the thought of favoritism at all, but in that context, in that culture, Leah is the oldest. Leah is the first wife. Leah should have had the place of greatest safety. But this, again, underscores that Jacob loved Rachel the most. Okay, verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And finally Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor with my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Okay, so Jacob is anticipating this really contentious reunion, perhaps violence, and instead, Esau runs and greets him and hugs him, and it really kind of puts me in mind of like the story of the prodigal son, right? Bygones are bygones at that moment. They're reunited, and Esau is like an excited uncle, like, "Well, tell me about your family. I can't wait to meet them all." Picking up with verse 10, Jacob said, "No, please, if I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand. For truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor." Okay, so this is incredible because Jacob has literally just wrestled with God, right? So to say seeing you is like seeing the face of God is not some theoretical thing you say like, "This is the greatest day of my life." It's not just some throwaway phrase. He's literally just seen God face to face, perhaps obscured a little bit by the darkness of early morning, but he's seen God face to face, and here he's saying that he puts this moment of reconciliation with his brother on the same level as seeing God face to face. It's wild. Okay, verse 11. "Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want." So he urged him, and he took it. Okay, so Jacob is saying, I was indeed blessed, right? He stole the blessing. But he was blessed. He was blessed with these wives and these children. And in fact, he left Laban with all kinds of livestock and riches. I mean, he's doing just fine. And he wants to share this with Esau, perhaps as a way of making amends, maybe just to clear his conscience. I don't know. But something that's really interesting that I never realized before is if you take a look at verse 11 and you see the word in the NRSV, it's translated gift. "Please accept my gift." In the Hebrew, that is the same word for blessing, the same word for what Jacob had stolen from Isaac that belonged rightfully to Esau. And so when he says, "Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want," it kind of makes you wonder what this gift blessing symbolizes for Jacob, what he wants it to symbolize, how Esau receives it. It's just a lot to think about. This story is an exciting example of reconciliation in the midst of incredible conflict, right? It's no small thing what Jacob did to Esau. And yet here Esau responds with grace. And in fact, they do not reconcile in the sense that they don't carry, their families do not reunite. In fact, Jacob kind of, the next few verses, if you want to read on, kind of tells Esau, "Yeah, you go on ahead, I'll catch up." But then he goes a different way. And so they make their peace. And it's maybe a lesson for us that reconciliation doesn't always mean that we're going to end up being best buddies. Maybe sometimes reconciliation just means we're going to clear the air and make things right and then carry on our separate ways. Okay, so that's the end of our story for today.